Hello, everybody. This is Sydney, and I'm coming to you with Chains and Eyeless Jack X Listener. We're going to be starting off with chapter 22, and it's starting off with Jack's POV. Hoo, hoo. A deep yet soft voice cooed near Jack, making him grunt and his eyelids flutter open. Inches away from his face was a pair of bright gold eyes. Yelping in shock, he nearly fell from the tree branch he sat on, grabbing it with his hands at the last second. As he dangled there, he saw the outline of an owl flying away, making him scowl. If he wasn't hanging onto the branch for dear life, he'd shake a fist at it. You stupid owl, he yelled after it, pulled himself back up. Leaning against the tree, he exhaled softly and stared at the moon, trying to remember what he was doing there. At some point, after freaking out and running away from the cabin, he must have fallen asleep. He must have been out for several hours. When he'd left, it was still the early afternoon, but now it was already nighttime. With a final glance at the moon, he sighed and carefully descended the tree, twigs and leaves snapping under his feet as he made the final drop, and stretched a bit before heading back to the cabin. During his walk, something gray leaning against a tree caught his attention. Glancing at it, he saw it was a folded newspaper, probably dropped by some campers or something. It was the right time of year for that, and people tended to litter and drop stuff a lot. One time he found a whole tent left behind just because there was a tear in it, though in retrospect there were signs that slender may have been involved. Anyways, newspapers were always welcome finds. Written articles contained much more information than could be shared in a 2-minute stories on news broadcasts. Picking it up and examining it, Jack was pleased to find that it seemed to be complete and skimmed the front page as he began the trek to the cabin. Local mother went insane and killed her daughter after stuffing her body with candy, so laughing Jack was back in town. It had been a while since the two Jacks had last seen each other, probably a year. Maybe he should go look for his fellow Jack later. Arriving at the cabin, he folded the paper and stuffed it into his pocket to read later. For now, he needed to figure out what to say when he saw Ash. He'd run out on her during a movie, and naturally she would have questions about it. Standing at the door, he could faintly make out voices from inside, followed by canned laughter. She must be watching TV, he thought, with a soft sigh. Of course, she didn't care about him. She had no reason. She probably turned on the television as soon as he left, and for some reason, that thought hurt. Why should it matter if she cared about him? Frowning, Jack quietly opened the door and walked inside, expecting her to stare at him with the owl eyes and scrambled to turn off the TV before he yelled at her for watching it without his permission. However, there was no such reaction. She just remained sprawled on the couch. Puzzled, he walked over and saw that her eyes were closed, and at some point while watching television she must have fallen asleep. A smirk played across his lips as he looked at Ash's sleeping form. She looked pretty peaceful like that. Envy twitched inside of him, not an angry one, but a more wistful one. He couldn't remember the last time he'd had a good night's sleep. Even his little nap just now left him feeling unrested. Sighing, he then found himself smiling. He turned off the TV, and when the loud click the old set made didn't rouse her, he walked to her room to retrieve her blanket. Gently covering her with it, he stepped back and smiled at the sight. At least someone in this house was getting a good night's sleep, right? With his pet properly covered, Jack made sure the front door was locked before walking to his bedroom. He wasn't really tired, but he figured he'd make less noise in his own room. Right now, he didn't feel like talking to her or anything else, really. He just wanted to be alone. Although it felt strangely nice knowing Ash was in the next room, it was like he wanted to be alone, but not completely alone. Such a strange and conflicting feeling, and he didn't like it. Sitting on his bed, he removed his mask and set it on the table before removing the newspaper from his pocket. Might as well read more about what good old LJ was up to. Reading the section on the front page, he turned to the mentioned page of the article's continuation, only to stop as another article caught his eye. Paper crinkling as his grip abruptly tightened. He leaned forward and stared at the headline, his hollow eyes slowly widening. Still several mysteries about gruesome mountain murder. Did it mean? Reading the article, his suspicions were confirmed. It was about Buddy. According to the article, Buddy's body had been found just 3 days ago when a friend from out of town stopped by to surprise him, only to find a surprise of his own. No weapon was found at the crime scene, and based on blood splatters and trails, it was believed he'd been fatally wounded elsewhere and died of blood loss after returning home. However, despite this, his body was missing all organs. Decay made it difficult to determine when he died and whether he was alive when the organs were removed. Numbness filled Jack as he stared at the article. So they'd finally found out about Buddy's death. It took longer than he expected. Apparently the house was more isolated than he thought. Speculation abounded about the murder, and though the article was brief, Jack was able to get the basic gist of it. Not much was known, no suspects, no witnesses, no estimated time of death. There were just too many questions without conclusive answers. As a testament to this, police didn't even know if Ash should be considered missing or not. While there was plenty of evidence that she lived there was no way to know if she was living there at the time of the murder. Many of Buddy's friends didn't even remember she existed. Usually they met in town, and Ash rarely tagged along. For all anyone knew, she could just be a common house guest or away at college, since no one even remembered her age. The few thought she was still a kid. It would help if police could find her birth certificate or social security number or something, and they'd never find it in Jack's nightstand. He smirked as he opened his drawer and pulled out a sheet of papers, sorting through them until he came across her birth certificate. Birthday, her birthplace, parents' names, anything he needed to know about her birth was there. He had the rest of the necessary papers, too, like insurance forms and her social security number. He'd grabbed them when they left after putting Ash in the car. Before leaving, he'd wanted to leave as much doubt about her as possible. Having gathered the papers while she was in the car, and clearly the article showed he'd succeeded in that goal. Sliding them back into the drawer, his smirk grew as he laid back. With this, Ash officially had nowhere else to go. Chapter 23. Reader's POV. In other news, the Jets are going to. Grogginess clouded my mind as I rolled over, quietly wishing for the unfamiliar female voice to go away so I could go back to sleep. Of course, it didn't leave, making me grunt and pull a blanket over my head. There was a sudden silence, making me smile in relief until I felt someone poke my shoulder. Frowning, I nestled tighter under the covers. "Oh, 5 more minutes," I mumbled. There was a pause, and the poke was replaced by a hand shaking my shoulder, making me grunt. "Buddy, no." "Don't call me that." The demonic-sounding hiss made my eyes pop open, and I bolted upright, gasping as I found myself face to face with Jack. I tried to scoot away from him, only for my back to press against the back of the couch, leaving me effectively trapped. His hands shot out and gripped my shoulders so tight I could almost feel his claw-like nails through his gloves, and as he spoke, his voice was laced with that same demonic quality. "Never say that name in front of me again, am I clear?" My face probably drained of color as I stared at him, nodding shakily. "I won't," I whispered, trembling violently. I promise I was just asleep," and I trailed off into babbling as I began to sob. His grip on my shoulders tensed before loosening, and after a moment he released it entirely. He reached for my face, and I winced, reflexively raising my arms to protect it, making him freeze. Slowly he let his arm fall limply to his side and sighed before walking away. I sat on the couch shaking, hugging myself as I fought off the urge to cry. This is what I get for letting myself fall asleep on the couch. As I sat there with my eyes squeezed shut, I heard the fridge and cabinet open, followed by a series of clinks. A few moments later, he tapped my shoulder, making me yelp and flinch, and spinning to face him. He stood behind the couch staring at me, unfazed by my reaction, and held out a bowl. "Breakfast?" I glanced at him and then the bowl in surprise. Frosted Flakes? But why were they— oh, right, I'd told him they were supposed to be refrigerated. "Thanks," I mumbled, hesitantly taking the bowl from him. His hands covered it in the air for a second before falling to his sides, and I turned to begin eating it, only to pause. No spoon. Hesitating, I silently raised it to my lips to carefully sip from the bowl, trying not to let any drip onto me. Watching me from behind after a few moments, Jack headed to the kitchenette and I heard a drawer open. Metal clinking followed, and he returned to tap me on the shoulder, extending a spoon to me. "If you need a spoon, you could have just said so," he commented, and I shrugged meekly. I didn't want to respond. I might say the wrong thing and make him mad, and lately I'd been more comfortable around him, but my usual confidence had faded a bit today thanks to my rude awakening. A few moments passed before Jack sighed, and realizing I probably wouldn't respond, he silently picked up the remote and unmuted the TV, allowing the news anchor to speak again. At this point, she'd moved on to a murder. "And there is still no sign of why the mother did that," she reported grimly. "Police have yet to track the origin of the candy, either." "Candy?" I mumbled absently. Kid's organs were scooped out and replaced with candy. Then the mom stabbed her in the heart, typical LJ junk. I nearly dropped the bowl and whipped my head to gawk at him. There were 1,000 questions running through my mind. Who was LJ? But they were overshadowed by disgust. Swallowing the bit of cereal in my mouth, I quietly set the bowl down, having lost my appetite. Seeing this, Jack sighed but didn't say anything, instead placing a hand on the couch and jumping over it. Landing next to me, I flinched and instinctively scooted away. However, he put an arm around my shoulder to stop me, sending goosebumps down my back. I sat still, momentarily stunned, and he picked up the remote with his other hand and began surfing the channels. Part of me wanted to protest the sudden contact, but the other part knew it was useless. Besides, I think he kind of needed the company. Memories of the photos on Buddy's account swirled through my mind, making me shudder involuntarily. Feeling my shudder, Jack cast me a curious glance, but I just looked away. The mere sight of his mask conjured more memories of the photos, making me sink deeper into the couch. Jack didn't say anything and returned his attention to the television. Feeling relatively safe he wouldn't pry about what I was thinking, I fell deep into thought. My entire old life was a lie. Everything was full of doubt. Not one memory felt completely clear of questions anymore. As I sat in silence, I stared at my lap, fiddling with my hands. I glanced at Jack out of the corner of my eye and saw he was staring at the TV. Though his mask made it hard to tell if he was looking at me. Of course, even if he wasn't wearing it, I probably wouldn't be able to tell. I'd seen him without it, and I knew he had no eyes, so why did he keep wearing it around me? A lot of stuff about him just didn't make sense, and having his armor on my shoulder made it hard not to think about him. It felt heavy and impossible to ignore, and made me sink into the couch a little bit. Eventually, though, I managed to shrug it off and got up, earning a look of surprise. I half expected him to order me to sit back down, but instead he asked, "Where are you going?" "To take a shower," I muttered, picking up my bowl and depositing it in the sink. Jack nodded and returned his attention to the TV while I headed to the bathroom. A few hours passed, and I sat on my bed reading a novel. I was so immersed in the fictional world that when I heard a loud click, I gave a large start and yelped, nearly dropping the book. Slowly opening the door, I saw Jack poke his head inside, no doubt looking pretty amused under his mask. "I wasn't even trying to scare you," he chuckled, and I pouted. "Shut up." Chuckling a bit more, he entered carrying a plate with a sandwich. His silent way of apologizing for this morning, I guess. He set the plate on the nightstand as I mumbled a thanks and waited for him to leave. However, he instead went to the dresser and opened one of the top drawers, making me shift and sit up. "What are you doing?" Ignoring me, he pulled out a balled up pair of socks and tossed them to me. "Put it on," he ordered. I stared at them in confusion for a few seconds before my eyes widened, realization slowly setting in. Stunned, I sat in silence while Jack stood next to the bedpost, tapping his foot impatiently. "Ash, I don't need to let you wear socks." I won't try to escape," I said quickly, my tone frantic. "I promise I don't have anywhere to go. The only person I really knew is dead, and—" "Ash," he growled, his tone cool, and I stopped. "Put it on already." Slowly, I unrolled the socks and pulled one over my right foot, and as soon as I tugged the hem, he was next to me holding the metal shackle, fitting it around my ankle. He made sure no fabric got in the way before closing it, slipping the key into the keyhole and turning it with a small click that sent chills down my spine. It had been a while since I'd last worn the chain, and I'd almost forgotten what it felt like. Part of me had hoped I'd never have to remember. A small whimper had inadvertently escaped me as I stared at it, and I quickly pulled my knees to my chest, burying my face in my arms. I heard Jack sigh and felt the mattress sink next to me, followed by a hand on my back. A shudder ran down my spine at the sudden contact, but I didn't raise my head. As he spoke, his voice was soft and gentle, as if trying to reassure me. "Ash, I know you don't like it, but I need to go hunting. I'm almost out of food, and you are too. So I have to be gone a little longer tonight, and I can't risk you trying to run away. I'll remove it when I get back." I didn't respond, making him sigh again. A few moments later, he moved his hand, and I felt the mattress rise as he stood, followed by the sound of his footsteps. There was a quiet click as he closed the door, leaving me alone. Only then did I allow myself to give a small sigh, flopping onto my back and staring at the ceiling. Looks like things were finally getting back to normal. That is the end of those two chapters. The chapter after this one is chapter 24. Let me know what you guys thought about that. And I'm enjoying it so far. I'm still a little sleepy, but I'm waking up. I'll get to you guys in the next video in a little bit. You guys have a good one. Bye bye.